Okay, hi again. Welcome back. Attorney Steve Vondran. We are talking in this video about Supreme Court, United States, Federal Court Overview, and a little bit about the Writ of Certiorari. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But now this video is going to be a little bit longer, but it's going to be packed with information. I'm going to give you a lot of the nuts and bolts of the things that, you need to know about the federal court system, how it works, and how a case might get to the United States Supreme Court. So listen in. This will hopefully be a lot of valuable information for you. Okay, so this is my website, and I'm just going to walk you through a blog that I just wrote. This is right here, how cases you might get to the United States via writ of certiorari. And I'm going to include some photos of a recent trip that I took to Washington, D.C. I got some really great photos, but I'm just going to show you a couple of those as we're talking through this. So here's the outside of the United States Supreme Court building. As I say here, it's the Yankee Stadium of the federal court systems. It's the top dog, the big court. This is where the big cases are heard that affect your life, okay, basically in a nutshell. So let's go through it here. So now, overview of the federal court system. Now we are talking about essentially three layers, okay? You're going to have your district courts, your courts of appeal, and you're going to have your United States Supreme Court, okay? And so your cases will usually work up from the district court to the United States Court of Appeals up to the United States Supreme Court, okay? District courts, what are these? The federal court system is made up of 94 district courts. These courts hear civil cases, criminal cases, bankruptcy cases, and these are known as trial courts because they may hear both civil, criminal, but they hear the facts. The jury, usually you have a jury system. This is where you're going to find your juries, and the juries are known as the finder of fact. They determine whether a fact is true, not true, what the facts of the case are. That's left up to the jury. So that's going to happen down in your federal district courts. Now I'm going to give you an example of California. Now California has 4 different federal court districts. They have the Northern District. Now that's up in the Northern District's up in the San Fran Bay area. You have the Central District. That's around Los Angeles area. You have the Eastern District, which is north of that. And then you have the Southern Division, which is down in, I should say district, down in San Diego, Southern California area. So you have these 4 different districts. If you want to watch a video to see what a district court is and how that system may look in one district in California, I've got a video there for you. Just go to my website here, United States Supreme Court. You can see the domain up there, and you can watch that video and learn a little bit more about the district court level. Okay. Now, there are also other federal courts, what we call courts of special jurisdiction, and these would be, number 1, your international court. This is located in New York, and in this international court, usually it's customs disputes, international disputes, both domestic and foreign. So you have these specially created, what we call Article 1 courts, which I'll talk about in a second. 2, you have the United States Court of Federal Claims. Now, this is really interesting. A lot of people probably don't know about this, but the United States Court of Federal Claims, this is where you go when you have a federal issue against the government. And there's a lot of different types of claims that this court may hear. Anything from a copyright infringement case against the government to harmful vaccinations where you're getting injured by vaccinations. Also cases where maybe you're unjustly convicted and you're coming back to the government saying, hey, I've been in jail for 25 years. Now I want compensation. You convicted me wrongfully of a federal crime of which I didn't do. So there's a lot of different cases in the U.S. Court of Appeals. I've provided some links here. If you want to go in and check those out and learn more about the individual courts, you can. In the United States Tax Court is another court. The Federal Veteran and Military Courts. You have all these different kinds of federal courts. Now keep track of what we're saying here. So now we have our district courts, which is our lower trial courts. We have these courts of special jurisdiction. And we also have down here, I have federal regulatory agencies. Now, although these are not technically courts, oftentimes you will see that they have hearings and there's things they can do to you or your business. For example, the SEC, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, FTC, Federal Trade Commission. So there's different enforcement actions and things that they can do. And these are, I call them courts. They're somewhat like courts, but these are also cases that can end up being appealed to the United States Supreme Court. Okay, so that's another level of federal courts. Then we have our U.S. Courts of Appeal. Now, there are 12 regional circuits located across the United States, and they're going to hear these different appeals coming up from these courts that we just mentioned, the district courts and these other special courts. The appeals are going to come up to the United States Court of Appeals. So I'm going to give you an example of United States Court of Appeals in California. For example, the Ninth Circuit. A lot of people have heard of this. The Ninth Circuit, a lot of decisions coming out of the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit covers this really huge western area of the United States, California, Arizona, Utah. You can see all the states that I have on here. It covers all these major areas. You can also see down here, a lot of people don't know, Guam and the Northwest Mariana Islands. So the courts of appeals are located throughout the United States, and these cases from the federal courts, if they're not happy, the person loses, the defendant's not happy with the decision, they appeal it on up to the U.S. Court of Appeals. That's your next step in the process, okay? Note the appellate courts, as I noted here, are not trial courts. These are, for the most part, these are courts that are going to look for prejudicial errors of law, things that happened in the lower court in the trial, really egregious things that happened, or maybe not so egregious, maybe failure to submit a piece of evidence. So the judge overruled the evidence and didn't allow it in the case. So this is where you see a lot of appeals. The appellate courts there's no juries. There's just essentially 3 judges. So the attorneys would be coming in, making the argument to 3 judges. Judges are going to make a decision. There's no juries or anything like that, okay? And again, these are where you're essentially the party that's coming up is the appellant. That's the loser, the appellant. And the appealee is the other person that won the case at the lower court level, okay? Let's see, and again, these courts can hear civil, criminal, bankruptcy, these trade issues, these copyright claims, these vaccination claims, anything, okay? So these are going to funnel on up to the United States Courts of Appeals. As I did some quick research on there, it looked like in 2016 there were over 10,000 appeals filed. So there's quite a few appeals filed, realizing that's covering a big area. You can see some district court maps, so you can see all the other areas in the United States, but there's a lot of different areas, okay? There's a look at the inside of the United States Supreme Court. If you've never seen it, this is you can actually take a tour. You can go out there and take a tour. This is what you can see. You can actually get a tour guide and go in there. You can see the benches. That's where your federal Supreme Court justices are going to sit. And as you can see, they're not sitting there today. So let's go down. Now, some people say, well, how was the Supreme Court established? Supreme Court was established by Article 3 of the United States Constitution, which says, Section 1, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. So the authority for creating the United States Supreme Court is right there in your Constitution. It gives the authority right there, and it gives Congress the authority to establish the lower, what they call inferior courts, and those are your federal district courts and these other special jurisdiction courts that we just talked about. So now you get a flavor of how that's going to work. As I put in here, Section 2, you can see cases. I'll let you read that if you're interested, but basically cases in law and equity, different cases, parties between 2 states, so forth and so on, other jurisdictional questions and things like that. Now, you may also hear the term from time to time, Article 1 courts. What are Article 1 courts? These are courts established by the legislative branch. Again, the ones I just talked about, the International Court, the Federal Court, U.S. Court of Federal Claims, the Tax Court. These are your Article 1 courts. Now, in these courts, it's a little bit interesting. It's a little bit different, and I'll talk about the federal judges in a second, but in these cases, the federal judges would not be sitting for their entire lifetime, meaning they would not have a guaranteed job for their entire lifetime. So that's something to know. How cases might progress to the Supreme Court. This is what a lot of people want to know. How do you get your case into the United States Supreme Court? Do you just file paperwork? Do they have to hear my case? The short answer is no, they don't have to hear your case unless it's an original case of original jurisdiction, and I'll talk about that in a second. I'll talk about it right now, matter of fact, it's right here. So there is one way to get in, and I've got, what do I have? I have your top 3 ways right here. 1, Supreme Court original jurisdiction. There are certain cases where, for example, ambassadors, there's a legal dispute involving ambassadors of another country. Those have original Supreme Court jurisdiction. That means they can just file a case just like you would a complaint in your federal court or your state superior courts. They can just file a complaint with the United States Supreme Court, and the court will hear it because this is Supreme Court original jurisdiction. Now, it's important to know that Supreme Court jurisdiction is usually known as limited jurisdiction. They can't hear every case under the sun. And so I have Article 3, Section 2, which points that out. In all cases affecting ambassadors and other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be a party. That's another class of cases where a state, let's say the state of Connecticut or the state of New York, wants to file a suit against another state. The Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction. So the Supreme Court may have the original jurisdiction in a case with an ambassador. Everything else, numbers 2 and number 3 that I'm going to talk about in a second, are appellate jurisdiction. They review the facts, and whatever they want to review, they're going to review. They're the Supreme Court. So they have appellate jurisdiction. So they have the 2 different types of jurisdiction. That's one way to get into federal court. Number 2, appeals from the highest state of any court. Now, to give you an example, so say I have a right of publicity case in the state of California. That's a state law claim. That's California Civil Code Section 3344. That's a state law issue. If I file my case in the Superior Court, let's say in Los Angeles, and I want to take that on up, I'm not happy, I lose the case, so I want to take it up on appeals, I take it to the Court of Appeals for the state court system. So I'm going from the state court to the state Court of Appeals. And if I'm not happy with the decision there, and if I have enough money or a good contingency case, you take the case on up to the California Supreme Court. That's the highest court in California. So your case would progress just the same way it would in your state court as it would in your federal court with your district court, your Court of Appeals, United States Supreme Court. Here you have your Superior Court, your Court of Appeals, and then you have your California Supreme Court. So when you get to the highest level here, if you're still not happy, if you still don't win that right of publicity case, you can take it up on writ. Take it up on a writ, as they say, writ of certiorari to the United States Supreme Court. Now, they may take it, they may not. A lot of times they don't take cases. Very few actually get through the net, but you have a chance anyway to take your case up to what we call the Court of Last Resort, the United States Supreme Court, the Court of Last Resort. So that's your second way in, is appeals from any of the highest state courts of any state. You know, Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut. Doesn't matter, on and on and on, okay? You can take it from the highest court up to the United States Supreme Court on a writ. Number 3, as I noted, is an appeal from any of those other cases, the other courts I was talking about, the district courts, the Article 1 courts, you know, the International Customs Court. You can take all that stuff up on a writ, but the judges are going to hold the discretion. They get to decide whether or not they're going to hear your case, whether it's not important enough, which is a lot of cases, and so forth and so on. All right, so here's one of the pictures that I took inside the Supreme Court building. This is Sandra Day O'Connor. She has her own federal courthouse named after her in Phoenix, Arizona, and there's a nice picture of her sitting there. Okay, What is a writ of certiorari? Let's get down to it. A lot of people want to know, what is it? It's basically a document that you file telling the court what happened. You've got your lower court proceedings and you're telling the court what happened. You're paying a fee. I believe it's $300, but you're paying a fee. And you're basically asking the court, will you please review this case? It's coming from a lower court and explaining the procedure and the process by which you came up to this court. And as you can see from my Cornell Institute, it's a writ meant for rare use, and it's Latin for to be more fully informed. Okay, so you're really just giving the judge the information. If the judge grants your writ, number one, you're partying, dancing in the streets, because that's a pretty big deal. And what it is basically is an order to the lower court, to the whatever the other court was that you were coming from, to deliver its record in a case so that the higher court may review it. Okay, the U.S. Supreme Court uses certiorari to select most of the cases. Remember I said there was original jurisdiction. The writ of certiorari is a common law writ which may be abrogated or controlled entirely by statute or court rules. And in fact, they do have the Supreme Court rules, which I will give you a link to down below if you want to go review it. So some people say, well, what type of cases are they actually going to hear? Let's go down a little further. Got this section here. Usually there has to be an important constitutional issue. For example, a free speech First Amendment issue. A Fourth Amendment search and seizure or something like that, Fifth Amendment due process, 10th Amendment states' rights, something along these lines, Second Amendment right to bear arms. So it could be any of these types of issues. That's one way. If you have something important enough that the justices decide we need to all get together and make a ruling here, then they may grant your writ. Two, number B, an important issue involving federal law. So say you have just a really important issue involving federal law, and it's important to the citizens as a whole. The judges may say, geez, we need to get together. We need to settle the law. We need to let people know this is an important issue. So it could be an important issue of federal law. That could be anything. That could be copyrights, trademarks, patents. That could be, admiralty law. That could be maritime law. It could be tax law. It could be anything that arises under the federal laws of the United States. Okay, that's B. That's another way, an important issue of federal law. C. Another way is where you have, remember I said you had all these different district courts, these circuit courts, and one circuit doesn't agree with another, and 4 side this way, 5 are siding that way. There's a split of authority, as we call it. There's a split of authority. That may be important enough for the justices to say, let's take this up. Let's settle the law in this area. We can't have all this big conflict of what the law really is. Okay? So those are some common ways to get in there. Now that's, again, they hold all the cards. They could decide just to hear just about anything that they wanted to, okay? What is the process? I'm not going to go through that with you here, but there is an information sheet on it here. Again, file it if you want to see what it is. Check out the Supreme Court rules there, the fee, and there's a phone number there for more information. Most of us won't be filing one of these, actually. It's just kind of nice to know how it works. There's a picture walking down the hallway, the Supreme Court building, walking down the hallway towards the main level. And again, will it be granted? That's up to them. Of course, odds are slim. The one stat that I looked at looked like there were 7,500 filings and 150 of them actually granted. So really high number versus, filed versus granted. So not too many. Doesn't mean to discourage you if you believe you have rights that were offended or something was done wrong. It's really a Supreme Court case that you want to take all the way, then you file, you give it a shot. There's some information about our firm there. I've got a great video on the First Amendment if you want to know more about that. And I've got some great links here to share. I'm just going to tell you about those real quick. Oyez, or oye, however they say it. Oye, oye. These are the live oral arguments. So if you're wondering, what does it really sound like when these lawyers are duking it out inside the Supreme Court chambers? What does it really sound like? Click there. You can look up the case. You can hear the lawyers arguing. It's pretty cool. Supreme Court opinions. I've got that here. The SCOTUS blog, Supreme Court of the United States. That's one I really like. And here's a list of your Supreme Court judges. So that's about it. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you've got it through this far, you're awesome. If you're taking some sort of civics exam, you're going to know more than most people are, political science people. So I hope that's been helpful. If you like this video, please share it, give me a thumbs up, give me likes, comment down below, do anything. Just show me some support, okay? Thanks a lot. I hope you have a great day. We'll talk again. Attorney Steve, you can find out my information at attorneysteve.com. It's general legal information only and not legal advice. Take care now.